Hello, welcome to Free Bible Commentary with Pastor Teacher Dr. Bob Utley. Be sure to visit Free Bible Commentary at www.freebiblecommentary.org. Now, here's Bob.
Studying, because this is not something that could be an eyewitness account. Either there's two or there's one. And there's not much way you can make a mistake like that. And since I believe the Bible's inspired, mistakes in the Bible give me problems. But I think that I've found that Matthew making two instead of one is a characteristic of him. I don't know if he had double vision or what, but he does the exact same thing to the blind man who was healed outside Jericho. In Luke chapter 18, verse 35, and in Mark chapter 10, verse 46, there's one blind man outside Jericho that Jesus heals. But in Matthew 20:29, there's two blind men outside Jericho. So it seems to be a characteristic of Matthew's gospel to double everybody. Many have thought that possibly there was one that was maybe more violent than the other. It's why Mark and Luke just list one demoniac, and maybe the same thing with the blind men. We just don't know. But it seems to be characteristic of Matthew to double this. The accounts are very brief in Matthew and Luke. They add a little bit different. But Mark is a much more vivid account. And I kind of want to set the picture for you, if I may, please. The storm has just been calmed by Jesus Christ. He stood in the bow of the boat and chided his disciples by having such little faith that they were afraid they were going to drown when the Lord of life was with them. And he just stood up in the boat and said, "Be still." And folks, it was pretty quiet around there. It's only my supposition, but I bet they had to row the rest of the way to land, because if Jesus calmed the wind, they were in a sailboat kind of thing. It's tough to get to land. So those old boys weren't too glad he calmed all the wind, and they had to row the rest of the way that night. But it wasn't too far, probably less than 5 miles, so they weren't too tired. But many people get the idea this happened next morning, but this couldn't have happened next morning because it doesn't take all night to go 3 or 4 miles. So it's still nighttime. And the moon must have been out, because there's details here of people seeing, and you can imagine this. You think Bloody Bones stories are bad. Can you imagine this boat full of disciples pulling up to the shore? And there's a high bluff, and they pulled up right where the graveyard is, and there's all these tombs, and Jews are nervous around tombs because it makes them unclean ceremonially. And anyway, here they were, pulled up right in the area of the cemetery, and they hear this dude screaming up there, screaming all over the place, hollering at them. Now, friends, I won't tell you, that doesn't nerve anybody. Laying in the tombs, and some guy's screaming, you know. And he doesn't say what he was screaming, but he just said he screamed all the time. Well, I would too if I cut myself. And he was screaming around there in the moonlight. No wonder Jesus was the first to get out of the boat. But those boys didn't want out of that boat. Said, "You go right ahead, teacher. We'll let you go first." So it says in verse 1, so they landed, I think it's still nighttime, on the other side of the sea, in the region of, now mine has Gersa, G-E-R-A-S-A. Matthew had Gadara. Every synoptic gospel has a different spelling of this word. And really, I think there's several towns that go by these names, and it's not so important that the word is misspelled, because it could refer to different towns. But I want you to picture the Sea of Galilee in your mind with me, okay? Here's the Sea of Galilee. The Jordan River comes in from the very top, and it goes out the very bottom, and the Dead Sea is down here. Well, Gadara is a part of a very Hellenistic region called the Decapolis. It just means in Greek the 10 cities. And it's on the southeast corner for you. That's for me, but for you it'd be this way. The southeast corner of the lake is where this huge area called the Decapolis is. It is a very Hellenistic area. It was controlled and conquered by Alexander the Great, and became a very Hellenistic part of this world. Had statues in all the cities and gymnasiums. It was very Greek, very Gentile, okay? And Jesus had not been here before, and we never hear of him coming back here. Now, notice it's verse 2. As soon as they got out of the boat, a man under the power of a foul spirit from the tombs met him. And this man lived among the tombs, and no one could any longer subdue him, even with a chain. For he had often been fastened with fetters and chains, but he had snapped the chains and broken the fetters, and no one was strong enough to overpower him. All night and all day he kept screaming among the tombs and on the hills, and kept gashing himself with stones. Beautiful picture. Now what we have here, and let's describe what they had tried to do for this man. It says here that he lived among the tombs. Now the Greek word for lived among the tombs, it's an imperfect tense. And literally it means settled down among the tombs. Friends, his home had become the cemetery. That's where he lived. Apparently his family and his friends could stand him no longer, and they drove him out of town, and he lived among the tombs. Okay, that's his home. That's where he lives now. And notice it says that he had often been fastened with fetters and a chain. Now, he had often been fastened is perfect tense in Greek, which means something that happens in the past with results that abide in the present. Now, the picture here in the Greek tense for me is these townsfolk would make raids because he caused so much trouble. And in Matthew, we learned that nobody could go by the road that went by the cemetery because they'd throw rocks at him and stuff and scream at him and scare him. So the traffic on the road was cut off. So the townsfolk would apparently go out in mobs and catch this boy, or the two of them, and tie him up with chains, fasten their hands, and then put fetters on their feet. Now, the word fetters comes, you know the word plural of foot, feet. Feet, ters, fetters. Foot chains, stocks, something to bind his feet, and these chains were for his hands. And they apparently would bind him up and then leave him. I guess they hoped he'd starve to death. But they'd tie his feet, tie his hands, and just leave him and say, that'll keep you, turkey. You just stay out in the tombs. And this guy was a strong fella. He was the Kevin of the New Testament. He broke all these chains. Man, just ripped these chains to pieces. That's pretty supernatural power. Now, how many of you watched, I don't know if it was on cable or not, because the little number on my TV set's broken, and I don't know what channel I'm looking at, but the other night I was watching a documentary on some channel, and it was about police work in the Bronx in New York. And it was an independent documentary about some of the problems in a ghetto. And these policemen were saying that sometimes even very small men 135 pounds, you know, that statue of a man, when he gets arrested, often go berserk. And by berserk, I mean they flat flake out. And it takes 4 big policemen to hold that one man. Now, I don't know how many of you have... I remember when I was in junior high school, a boy got hit on a motorcycle, and his head was caught under the car. And they had a huge coach there, played for TCU, named Spain. And that man was a big man anyway, but he couldn't lift the car. But he went out there, and in the excitement of that moment, he picked up that Chrysler and moved it off that boy. Now, if he'd have been thinking about it, he couldn't have done that. I've heard of stories where people have been trapped in cars, children trapped in burning cars, and mothers get so excited, literally rip the doors off automobiles to get their children out. Now, the human body is like the human mind. We don't always use the full extent of the potential we have in our muscles. We never tax our muscle to the limit in our strength. But when your adrenaline gets going, and when something like a demon is also involved, this man had tremendous strength, okay? He'd break these chains. And notice it also says about him that he screamed. Now, the word screamed in verse 5, that's not a little, ha-ha. Man, this old boy was hollering. And he was hollering night and day. Can you imagine living in town close to a guy that hollered all the time? Screamed night and day. And whenever they saw him, he cut himself with rocks. You see, stones. He'd gash himself. Now, this goes back, I think, to 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 28, where it's mentioned of the people who worship Baal, that when Elijah was sitting there, and they were supposedly to call down Baal to answer by fire, and Elijah was going to call down God, and they couldn't get any response from Baal, and so Elijah said, well, maybe you ought to cut yourself a little more. You know, maybe you ought to scream a little louder. And so part of the pagan worship of these idols and these deities were the gashing of themselves to show how sincere they were in the screaming. So it's very significant to me that this demoniac, a man possessed with a demon, was doing the same things in the New Testament that went along with Baal worship in the Old Testament. Now, so this is the picture of the man. This is the kind of man it was. And it says in verse 2 that this man was under the power of a foul spirit. He was possessed with a demon. And so since this is the longest account of an exorcism, before I get into the rest of it, I want to talk in generalities about demon possession and demons in our day. And I brought some books because there's no way I can say everything I want to tonight, and I don't even claim to be able to say everything. And so I want to show you some books, and I'm going to leave them here, that will be very interesting for you to read. I'm not trying to scare you, and I want to say it again. I'm not trying to get you uptight and nervous and anything like that, but I am trying to show you in a very specific way the truth of Ephesians 6:11 and following, that we are in a spiritual warfare. And though we can't see with the naked eye the things in the spiritual realm, they are as real as the things that you touch and taste and handle every day. And we are in a spiritual battle for the lives of men. and demon possession because I believe in the authority and the authenticity of the revelation. And because of that, and because the revelation makes a distinctive difference between mental illness and demon possession all through the New Testament, then I think it's important for us as New Testament believers to at least look somewhat in this area of demon possession. When I was in seminary, I came across this book, Christian Counseling and Occultism, by a man named Koch, C-K-O-C-H. He is a German evangelist. And I sat down to read this book, and this book scared me out of my wits. Because this book is a case history from England and Europe, documented. If you don't believe it, you just write him. He'll give you their names, their dates, and where you can contact them if they're still alive. And this book is series after series, case after case, of demon possession in our day. And this book was written in consultation with a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a medical doctor. If they could possibly eliminate this any way medically or psychologically, they would. And what remains from those case histories are what's recorded here. This is not only a book of trying to startle you, but it's also a book of how Christians can minister to those trapped by these kinds of things. The thesis of this book is that occult powers are inherited from parents who have been involved in the cult and are also developed in this life by those who allow the occult to become a part of their life. So this book is a very interesting book for you to look at. This was given to me by Carrie Spain, who locally is the manager and the originator of what's called the Way Outreach Ministry, which deals with people who have been enslaved by occultism and cults and demon possession. This is a new book out, and it's very good. It is not written by one man, but is written by a series of men, from theologians to historians to psychologists to medical doctors. You name it, they have chapters in here from their different perspectives and their different theological disciplines. This book is very informative, and this book does not go to extremes, which I find so often in this field. Either there's a demon behind every tree, or they're all made up, and both of those are wrong. So this is an excellent book right here, Demon Possession. One of them that I do not have that's very good, that one of you have on your shelves, by the way, and if you find it, I want it back. It's a book by John Newport called Demons, Demons, Demons. John Newport was professor at Southwestern for years, went to Rice in the Department of Philosophy, and is back at Southwestern now. I trust him very much, and his book is very good on demons. This book is by John Warwick Montgomery, a historian. It's called Principalities and Powers. It's a very balanced book. This book is by Unger, the same guy did the Unger's Handbook. It's called Demons in the World Today. And these books are on demonology and possession and those kind of things. These other two books are a little different, but they deal with the same area of occults. And by cults or occults, I mean those groups that either tend to a perverted Christianity or be totally committed to the powers of darkness. This is the Kingdom of the Cults, and Henry Breland gave this to me for a birthday present years ago, and Henry, it's been very useful. Thank you. And this is Chaos of the Cults, and it's also a very good book about things like all the different cults in our day. So if I spark an interest in you, you come look at these books, and I hope you'll buy them and read about it. Now, what about demon possession? First of all, what is a demon? The Bible does not explain the origin of demons or who they are or what they look like. The medieval picture of the devil with a little red tail, a little bitty short squatty man with a big belly and little horns was just a way to make the demonic and the evil something that people could laugh at. We do the same in our day. We go to these dumb movies and ridiculous things. We say, oh, that's ridiculous. Isn't that funny? Ha ha. And I want to tell you that we sometimes are very duped because we make too little of the spiritual realm. You believe in angels, don't you? Well, the counterpart of angels are demons. They are fallen angels, I believe, angels that fell when Satan rebelled. There apparently are two groups of angels that fell with Satan. One group is, we are told about in the book of Jude and the book of 2 Peter, is in chains in darkness until the time of judgment in a place called Tartarus, which is a holding place. And these angels are not the ones that are free to roam the world and be the minions of Satan, but these angels are in chains and locked up there. And you can look at the little book of Jude to find out. Another group of angels that fell with Satan, apparently, since Satan is a created being, he's in one place at one time. He cannot read your mind. He only has the powers that God allows him to have. He's a very intelligent person, much stronger and smarter than we are, but he is not an omnipresent, all-powerful being. And therefore, he can't be in New York and Seattle at the same time or something. And therefore, he has what we call demons to try to do his will in the world. Now, this account is going to deal with the exorcism of a group of demons from a man. Now, science will say there's no such thing. But I think that since World War II and Korea since we've seen some of the occult things in our day and the Satan worship, since even in West Texas so many cows have been ritually slaughtered in the past few years, that we're beginning to realize that we're fools if we don't think there's something in this thing called the spiritual forces of evil that are present in our world. So even if you don't believe the Bible, even if you discount that, it's just a historical accommodation that Jesus made. And friends, you just read your paper and see the things that are going on all around us. And I think the reality of a force of evil in our world will somehow come home to you. Now, this man who is possessed by these demons ran up to Jesus Christ, beginning in verse 6. He had just stepped out of the boat, and this man runs up. And the trick is, he runs up, and I don't think he was running to kiss his cheek. Friends, he was running up in a fit of rage. And as he got closer, as you see from verse 6, he fell down on his knees before him. Now, this to me is almost a fulfillment of prophecy mentioned about the last day that we find in Philippians 2, chapter 10, where the Bible says that one day every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father, and even the demonic world is involved in that kind of thing. Because in Mark chapter 1, verses 23 and 24, the same thing happened about the demonic there. Jesus did not confront these demonics. The demonics confronted Jesus. These demonics were hostile to Him. He did not seek them out, but they just confronted Him. And He had to do something with it. Now notice what happened. This demon screamed aloud. Now friends, this guy's not talking in low, subdued tones. I mean, this guy is screaming, and this is what he screams. What do you want of me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? In God's name I beg you, do not torture me. Well, that'll give you cold chills on a good night, won't it? Well, this little phrase, what do you want with me, Son of the Most High, is the same kind of theological phrase that Vernon read where he says, Son of God. Earlier in Mark 1:23, he says, Son of the Most High. So these demons recognize Jesus. You say, well, how could that be? In James chapter 2, verse 19, James says, you believe in one God, you do well. The demons believe and shudder. The demons aren't theological dum-dums. I mean, they know what's going on. They know better what reality is than you do. And they recognize Jesus as God's Son immediately, and therefore they confront Him. And notice the little phrase, in God's name, there in the last part of verse 7. This is an idiom that would better be translated, swear to God. Now, what that demon was trying to do is to get Jesus to swear to God that Jesus wouldn't hurt him. Well, that's strange, isn't it? The demon trying to get Jesus to swear to God. That's what it is. In God's name could better be translated, swear to God that you won't torture me or torment me. Now, Luke and Matthew say it's not our appointed time yet. These forces of evil know they've already been defeated. There's no doubt in their mind. But what they keep saying is it's not time. You're not playing fair. It's not the end of the world. You can't do this now. Why are you doing this to me? And so they continue to confront him with those kind of things. It's not the time. What do you want with us? You have nothing to do with us. Now, Jesus, I want to get you the picture here. There's two imperfects in verse 8 and verse 9. Jesus was continually saying to him, and then in verse 9, and the demoniac continually asked him. Now, what's happening here? Jesus keeps telling him, keeps asking him, what is your name? And the demon keeps talking about, let me see. No, Jesus keeps saying, you foolish spirit, come out of him. And the demon keeps on talking, wait a minute, send us in the hogs, every kind of stalling tactic you can imagine. So it's an exchange back and forth and back and forth. And you can just see the disciples dumbfounded, standing around, gawking at this scene in the moonlight as they fight back and forth in this verbal battle. So Jesus says to him, you foul spirit, which is a word means unclean spirit, come out of him. And Jesus asked, what is your name? Continually asking. Apparently the demoniac didn't want to tell him. Now, what does it mean when it says, what is your name? Some have said that Jesus was trying to get this demon's name because if you have the name of the demon, you can have power over him. That's a bunch of baloney. Jesus was not the Jewish exorcist trying to get this demon's name so he could cast him out. This is the Son of God. He didn't know this demon's name for that, but I think he is saying, what is your characteristics? Who are you? What kind of a foul spirit are you? He wanted the disciples to hear. See, this whole scene is not for Jesus. This whole scene is for the disciples and the villagers who are about to come on the scene. Now, this is just like Jesus is doing this, just like back in the Garden of Eden, God asked Adam, where are you? You think God didn't know where Adam was? No, it was a lesson for Adam. And here was a lesson for the disciples. Now, what is your name? The demon said, my name is Legion, for we are many. Now, Legion is, about 6,800 and something men. And you say, you mean this guy had 6,800 demons? Well, I don't know all about that. I just know that's what the demon said. He said, my name is Legion. Now, those of you who are familiar with number symbolism in the Bible know that probably, since Mary Magdalene had 7 devils in her and all that, 7 demons, that what we're talking about here is degree of control and not the number of demons in a person's life. Now, it seems to me one demon's as bad as 50,000. I don't know the difference, you know. So maybe it's one of control or something like that. I just don't have all the answers here. Now, notice when it says, and they kept on earnestly begging him not to send them out of that country. So Jesus continues to say, come out of him. And they keep saying, don't send us out of here. He says, come out. Don't send us out of here. And so it's a real battle now. Now listen what happens. What is a little phrase, out of this country, mean? What does that mean? Some folks think it means don't make us leave the area of the Decapolis where these Gentiles are. Many times in Revelations, used several times, it's the equivalent to the Old Testament idea of the pit, the bottomless pit, a place of evil where in Revelation the locusts come out of, if you remember that. The place where Satan was chained in the 20th chapter of Revelation. So it's that kind of place. And apparently these demons are afraid that's where they're going to be sent back to. And they say, no, don't do that to us. So there was a large herd of hogs grazing on the hillside, and they begged him, send us into the hogs. Very interesting to me that these demons have to ask permission, right, before they can do anything. Now, so they don't send us in the hogs so that we can get in them. So he let them do so, and the foul spirits came out of the man and got into the hogs and drove about 2,000, rushed over the cliff and down into the sea and were drowned. Now, I've read commentaries and my ears are hurting and my eyes are hurting about, oh, Jesus is unfair. He's destroying private property. Oh, croak. Friends, we've got a man's life here, and we don't even know if that was an act of mercy to keep those demons out of the village more than it was anything else. Matter of fact, Jesus may have allowed those demons to go in those hogs to show two or three things about those demons. Number one, the huge number that's involved. 2,000 hogs run down the hill. That's a lot of influence, isn't it? Now, well, I guess Arkansas has that, but I refuse to rate Arkansas in demon possession, at least at this point in the season. The other thing is, I think they shows the nature of these demons. They weren't out to make this man a popular guy. You see, the purpose of the demonic is to destroy human life, to thwart God's will, to stop what God's doing in people's life. So I think that by letting these demons go into the hogs, everybody around, including the keepers of the hogs, saw the destructive nature of these kinds of forces of evil, that they destroyed the hogs. Now, the picture here is, the hogs were grazing on the hillside on a cliff, and they began to run down and run into the sea, and the tents here on dry is imperfect. Man, these hogs were going under one after another. You ever heard a hog scream when you ever deal with hogs much? Boy, wow. They squeal, and they holler, and they snort, and you can just hear 2,000 of them in this lake, and you know how when you're on a lake, how everything echoes and reverberates? 2,000 drowning hogs is a wonderful music in the moonlight. And they were just going on under one after another, until all of them it was perfectly quiet. Just from all this screaming and hollering of the demoniac and the hogs and the confrontation with Jesus, it's just quiet. Well, these guys who were keeping the hogs were also on the hills, and they saw the demoniac over there, what was happening there, and they saw the hogs run off, and friends, they ran to town and began to tell everybody, it's still night, must be early morning or something. Now, so those swine herders run off, listen to what it says. The hog feeders fled, verse 14, and spread the news in the town, the country around, and the people came to see what had taken place. The same way that I was in Houston, taking out on vacation. Houston is a huge city. It has a freeway that circles it that is 9 or 10 lanes wide. You've been there, probably seen it. 5 lanes on both sides. And there was a wreck in one lane on one side, and everybody was so curious to see the wreck that 10 lanes of traffic were fouled up because of one little wreck. Have you ever had drive by and see a wreck in Lubbock, and everybody starts to stop to see what's happening? Curious. A fire. People go like crazy. Races. People love to see crashes. We're weird kind of folks. And we like that kind of stuff. And these people said, oh, something weird's happened. Let's go see what it is. The whole town went out there to see what was happening. You know, they had heard this guy screaming, and they said, something's happened. Let's go see what's happened. Curiosity sometimes amazes me. It just amazes me what we go to see. Now, so they all came out there in verse 15, and they came to Jesus and saw. The word for saw here in Greek means they looked intently. Saw the man who had once been insane under the power of demons sitting with his clothes on. Implications being he'd been running around naked all this time. So you see, streaking is not current, it's biblical. That's not what I meant to say. It's mentioned in the Bible, put it that way. Now, notice, if you will, he's got his clothes on, he's in his right mind, and they were frightened. Now picture this. Jesus has stopped the local problem. The town council had been so upset, Blagg. And Jesus had solved all the problems. And they came out, and everything had been solved, and the problem was settled, and they became afraid. Now, isn't that a strange reaction? They didn't thank God for the demoniac. They weren't rejoicing that this problem had been solved, this man had been restored to his family. No, they're scared. They're afraid. And this is what happens. Verse 16. And those who had seen it told them how it occurred to the man who had been under the power of the demons and about the hogs, and they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. Why? Well, friends, he was rocking the boat. We just can't have all the hogs killed, can we? We just can't let this thing have an uproar. We can't be unsettled by this. And besides, we don't know this guy, and he scares us with his power, and we just want him to get out. Isn't it strange, the reaction of men to Jesus Christ? Some come to him in humble adoration, and some are afraid of him and flee. And these people were afraid of him and said, we want you to leave right now. We don't care if you heal somebody. We don't care if you're a good man. We don't care who you are. We want you to get out and not come back. And Jesus, being the kind of man that he is, left. But notice what he did first. And as he was getting into the boat, the once insane man kept on begging him. And you can just see the picture. This man who still has the cuts on his body, still oozing blood, still not physically over what had happened to him. And he's begging Jesus to let him go with him. Over and over he's begging him. 19. However, he did not let him, but said to him, go home to your folks and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and has taken pity on you. And so he went away and began to tell everybody in the 10 cities, the Decapolis, how much Jesus had done for him, and everybody was dumbfounded. This is the first home missionary. I want to say two things. Number one, when you get right with God, the first group that God wants you to go to is your family. You hear me? That's why the New Testament keeps saying over and over again that so-and-so was saved and his house. And so-and-so was saved and his house. The first group that we're responsible for after we trust Jesus Christ is our own family, our own loved ones. And so Jesus sent this man back home to his wife and family and his relatives. And he had been, how many years he'd been out there cutting himself and making a laughing stock of that family? We don't know. But don't you know that family rejoiced in the Lord that night his daddy came back home? And then finally, because our love for God compels us not to quit with our neighbors and our friends, this man began to tell what Jesus had done for him everywhere in the 10 cities. Jesus never came back to the Decapolis area, but Jesus left the man there with a true, firm witness. We'd say he didn't know enough. He just was saved. How could he share? Jesus sat with that man for how many hours that night? We don't know until the townspeople came back and talked to him by the fire there. So he equipped him to be the kind of man he wanted to be. The tense here in the verb about what God has done for you is perfect tense. It means it's once and for all, completed kind of action. God's done something, and the results of that are going to abide in this man's life to the day he dies. And notice when it says that when they told these people all this, they were dumbfounded and couldn't believe what Jesus had done. And so Jesus leaves a witness there with these men. I want to say to you that my understanding of evil is very synonymous to my understanding of the Holy Spirit. I have to cooperate with the Spirit of God for Him to be active in my life. The sermon this morning was nothing less than an urgent appeal on my part for you to put your lives in the hands of God by faith, a volitional commitment on your part. For God will not control your life unless you ask Him to, unless you yield your life to Him. The demonic is very much the same. As you begin to yield yourselves to influences that you know not of God, as you begin to visit the things in our world that are associated with evil, as you begin to dabble in the occult and the things of Satanism, Just as the possession of the Holy Spirit takes the volitional commitment on the part of the person, so I believe that possession on the part of the demonic is a voluntary, cooperative thing on the part of people. It may be in ignorance. They don't know what they're doing, but they still have to cooperate. And I want to say this about the demonic. I think it's very true. I do not believe that a Christian can be possessed by the forces of evil. Because of the great promise that I've quoted many times to myself, if I've become afraid, and I want to tell you, if you've never become afraid of the spiritual realm around you, you've never been in the battle for the Lord anywhere, for anybody's soul. Many times I say to myself, "Oh Lord God, greater is He that's in me than he that's in the world." That's 1 John 4:4. Therefore I believe that a Christian, no matter how fallen away or backslidden, cannot be possessed by the powers of evil. But I do believe that we can be influenced, that our testimonies can be thwarted, that our lives can be ruined, and our influence can be stopped if we allow our lives to be influenced by those kinds of forces of darkness and evil in our day. I remember, and I want to tell you some of the things I think are that kind of thing. I think astrology is going that way. I think Ouija boards are going that way. I think that palm reading and horoscopes are going that way. I was in vacation over to Carlsbad with Peggy, and I saw the most beautiful turquoise necklace that I would have loved to have, a big old thunderbird. And then I said to myself, you know, that necklace represents a god, and that god's a pagan god. And I just don't feel like that I, as a child of God committed to Him, can wear on my neck the symbol of a pagan deity. Friends, if you just go through your house tonight, you wouldn't believe the things that you've got that represent pagan deities. On my desk, I have 2 bull elephants. Have you ever seen them? Those of you been there? And the other day I realized, you know what those 2 bull elephants represent? They represent 2 gods of Hinduism. And I took it off my desk. Not because there's any power in those stinking little elephants, but because I just, as a Christian, don't want to be identified with anything but the Lord Jesus. So I'm going to throw this up for discussion, and I know it's 8 o'clock, but we're going to discuss it a minute because I know it's a very difficult area. I don't have all the answers. Matter of fact, I'm very confused myself. I'll share with you my perspective, and I'll let you express yourself if you'll feel free to talk to me. Yes, Ron. I have no idea. My own personal theory seems to be that until the host dies, they can't go somewhere else. And so apparently by the hogs dying, they were released because the drowning didn't kill the demons. See?